all human beings, we are all graduates from the University of Adversity.
Yeah.
The same university, which is life, right? And I think the older we get, the higher the degree, because we've experienced a lot more in life, right? I mean, we lose
Yeah.
loved ones, we have financial stress, relationship issues. I mean, all kinds of things happen. So adversity to me is just part of life. And that's when I started early on to say, pressure, there's no such thing as pressure. I lean into pressure. Because what happens is, and it also builds up your confidence when you lean into pressure and you overcome things and challenges and adversity, and you build resiliency, right? You're building muscle in essence.
Yeah.
If you always played it safe, I'm going to stay within my comfort zone. And why do we say it is comfortable in the comfort zone? And it's great to be in the comfort zone, but there's no growth in the comfort zone. That's the difference.
Let's link up with Krista on the Fix. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
Hey, Fix listeners, welcome back to our latest episode of the Fix podcast. I'm your host, Krista Huber. And as I promised just a couple of weeks ago, now that we're into the month of November, I am introducing our first guest in the last few episodes of the Fix. And you'll hear us joke at the beginning that he had some big shoes to fill to be one of our first guests in a little while. And he does way more than that. Today's guest is Dr. Elia, who is known as America's Happiness Doctor. And when I tell you this conversation is just such a delight and such a breath of fresh air, I really mean it. You can feel it in his energy, in his passion about this topic. And he, like he says, walks the walk of practicing happiness, but coming at it from a place of, we know life is going to throw us curveballs. We know life is going to throw us moments of adversity. It's not a matter of if, it's simply a matter of when. And that allows us to then think about happiness from a place of, how do we respond to situations versus react to them? It's not a let me be happy all the time in a disingenuous way. And Dr. Elia just captures that so well. He talks about tangible exercises and activities that we can do, throws in a bunch of great analogies and nuggets and all these one-liners that, as a nutrition coach, and for those of you who listen to the show, no, I'm really big on myself. So it was just a really great conversation. And he and I shared a lot in common with having grown up as swimmers. So it just kind of connected right off the bat here with this one. And I think you'll feel that in the flow of this conversation. Dr. Elia is the author of a few really incredible books. So what I would encourage you guys to do is, if anything from this episode resonates with you, first, please send us a DM. He actually personally makes this request at the end of the episode, but we really mean it when we say it. Like, we want to hear from you guys. I want to know what resonated with you, because I just felt like every 2 minutes I was like, yeah, I'm going to fangirl over this a little bit. And I loved this piece and I loved that statement. We could have probably kept going for a couple hours, but just knowing that this is the type of work that's available to you through professionals like Dr. Elia, take advantage of it. Don't just take this hour-ish of this podcast episode and kind of leave it behind. If it resonates, take the next step, delve into the work a little bit further, and check out some of his other work. Listen to other podcast episodes that he's done too. So all that will be linked down in the show notes if you want to connect with him. And I am really, really looking forward to how this episode is received. So with that, let's kick it over to Dr. Elia with today's episode of The Fix. Dr. Elia, welcome to the Fix podcast. Just as we were saying before we hit record, we have a lot to cover, and I'm really excited about this conversation. It was absolutely meant to be two fellow swimmers on the episode today. So with that said, we're going to jump right into it. And as a kind of fun little icebreaker question to welcome guests to the show, you're my first guest I've had in a few episodes. So, no pressure, but big shoes to fill today.
I like pressure. Pressure is good.
Perfect.
Lean into pressure in life. When pressure comes, don't shy away from it. Lean into it and watch what happens.
So true. So well said. Now, what is your go-to coffee order? What do you like to sip on in the morning to get your day going?
It's always, and I only drink one. It's the Frappuccino. It's first thing in the morning.
Oh, Nice.
Right?
Okay.
Drink
What are we putting in there?
one cold frappuccino, then I'm done for the rest of the day. I don't drink more coffee after that.
Okay. Are you making it at home or are you picking it up from Starbucks?
Unfortunately, I don't make it at home. No.
That would be a fancy drink to make at home. I'd be impressed. So that's why I
Yeah.
had to ask. Very nice. Well,
Yeah.
cool. Well, like I said, I have a second question that is a little more of an off the beaten path type question for a podcast, but I find that it really influences and informs the rest of our conversation. I like for it to be a surprise because I really want like your gut reaction first answer that pops into your
Oh,
head.
you'll get it. You'll get it.
I thought so. After doing my prep for this interview, I was like, this is the perfect person to ask this. So, that said, there are obviously lots of podcasts and information and different things that people can listen to get their entertainment, right?
Sure.
With that in mind, why should somebody care about what you have to say? And instead of giving us like your typical resume, because I can do that for you, I want to know at your core, like, who is Dr. Elia and why should we care about who you are, your mission, your work, and what you do?
I'm like, I walk the talk. It's just, and I am the happiness doctor, and have been for decades. It's nothing like my wife and I've been together for 33 years. Like people ask her, like, okay, we know what he's like when he's on stage or whatever, doing keynotes, traveling the world, talking about heaven.
Sure.
What's he like at home? He goes, what you see is what you get. That's him.
That's
And
amazing.
and, and I've had and I know it's a gift. Um, I've always had the big picture perspective, meaning that when challenges happen in life, I'm able to pull back the lenses, and say this too shall pass. And specifically because we all face adversity in life, you and I
Mhm.
talked a little bit about that, and losing my mom early on in my life and so on. Um, we can go into victim mode, which happens all the time, or we can go into what one of my just all-time heroes, I think, is Nelson Mandela, who, being in prison for like 27, 29 years, comes out with a heart not full of resentments, but with a heart
Sure.
full of love, and forgives his oppressors and so on, right? In apartheid in South Africa. One of the things that he said that has so resonated with me is like, in life, either you win or you learn,
Mm,
meaning that there's
very
no real
profound.
losing. Like,
Sure.
as long as you're learning something. So for me, when we face challenges and adversities, I quickly go, what's the lesson in this? Is it easy when you're going through it? Obviously not. I'm a human being just like everybody else. But I shift to, like, instead of why is this happening to me, why is this happening for me?
Mhm.
And that's one word, to me versus for me. To me, I go into victim mode. For me opens up the possibilities, like, well, there's something good going to come out of this. And I need to figure out what that is. And sometimes it takes some time, some meditation, some prayers, just being open. But the answers do come. And and I've kind of lived my life that way, like for the last 40 years, on a daily basis. I kid you not. I'm no exaggeration. And it's been a
No,
good
I
life as a
believe it.
result of that.
Yeah, I can feel it from you to your point of saying that you recognize that this is a gift, but also acknowledging walking the walk. I think there's another gift in that as somebody who can really like read other people and read their emotions, there's a sense for when it is actually genuine, right?
Yeah.
And in this pursuit of being happy and defining that and what that means, the most important distinction you've already made here right out of the gate is the fact that it's not a question of if something adverse will happen to you and if that will challenge your outlook on life. It's a matter of when, right? And I feel that that's an even more important note to make here in the world we live in today, because you think about this word happiness, or you think about the concept of positivity and positive psychology. We also think how it can be taken in different directions, like the whole world of like toxic positivity. And I don't get that sense from you in any way, because you're bringing up the most, like, right from the jump. Like, we're not saying like to have this perfectly happy outlook all the time. What we're saying is we know adverse situations will come up, and here's how we might want to think about them. And I mean, I'd love your take on that. Like, what do you think about this
Yeah. And
concept of toxic
specifically, I feel
positivity?
like all human beings, we are all graduates from the University of Adversity,
Yeah.
the same university, which is life, right? And I think the older we get, the higher the degree, because we've experienced a lot more in life, right? I mean, we
Sure.
lose
Yeah.
loved ones, we have financial stress, relationship issues. I mean, all kinds of things happen. Um, so adversity to me is just part of life. And that's when I started early on to say pressure, there's no such thing as pressure. I lean into pressure because what happens is, and it also builds up your confidence when you lean into pressure and you overcome things and challenges and adversity. and you build resiliency, right? You're building muscle in essence.
Yeah.
If you always played it safe, I'm going to stay within my comfort zone. And you know, why do we say it is comfortable in the comfort zone? And it's great to be in the comfort zone, but there's no growth in the comfort zone. That's the difference. So there are times in life when in our comfort zone and life flows and it's easy and it's beautiful and it's great, but it doesn't last because that's not how life is. And adversity comes in, and adversity is not your enemy. I guess when we're facing adversity, I want you to think about it. It's here to teach me something, and in some ways to make me a better human being, I think.
I
So
couldn't agree with you more.
and I'm not saying I want to invite more adversity in my life. That's not what I'm saying. Is like, but when it comes, because inevitably it does come, is how will I deal with it? That's the only thing that matters. It's not like it's not going to come. So, you know, part of the happiness, of course, is do have a positive mindset that things will work out in the end somehow.
Yeah. The piece about confidence, right? I actually recently did a solo episode on this topic when it comes to fitness and nutrition. It's really interesting because when you think about the concept of confidence, how do you get it? You get it by doing the things that you promised yourself you were going to do. And in the context of somebody's health journey, in the context of trying to lose weight, what's fascinating is we conceptually know the decisions that will ultimately lead us to feeling our best, right? Yet we make other decisions along the way that may actually do the exact opposite for, you know, a short-term instant gratification because of stress, whatever it is. And in this episode, I made the point of the way we grow our confidence of actually keeping these promises to ourselves is also going to lead you to the path and to becoming the person that you see who's already lost the weight, who already gets up in the morning and is able to put on the first pair of pants or dress or whatever it is that's in your closet and be like, I feel really good about this. And that's confidence too. So they really ultimately do go hand in hand.
Well, it's kind of funny that you talked about, you know, nutrition and exercise and movement. Before the pandemic, I used to walk like 3 times a week for an hour because I'm like, I'm getting older. I just need to move, not to become a triathlete, but movement is good. Movement is life.
Mm-hmm.
But when the pandemic hit and the stress levels for everybody, including me, started going up to take care of family, extended family, friends, and so on. I mean, I just said, you know, 3 times a week is not enough. I got to walk every day. And I kid you not, since April of 2020, I walk every single day, no matter what happens. But now I do it because I want to, which is different because I saw what that level of consistency has done. And 50% of the time, I don't even take my cell phone with me like I used to before.
That.
I leave it behind, and I do what I call my gratitude walk. Seriously, I'll
Yeah,
walk
tell me
for
more
a
about
full
it.
hour. I do 3 miles for a full hour. I will thankful for the blue skies, thankful for the little critters running around, thankful for the beauty of nature, being in nature. By the time I come back, not only am I physically like it feels good because you know I've walked 3 miles, at least 3 miles minimum, but my batteries are full because we know that when we're in a grateful state, we can't be depressed simultaneously, physiologically, because the chemicals in our brain that get released when we're in a grateful state, there's no depression, there's no sadness, and my batteries are full, and I can take on the day no matter what happens as a result of that. And I'm telling you, self-care, when it comes to that, is a non-negotiable for me. Non-negotiable. And people say, well, isn't self-care selfish? I'm like, yes,
Nope.
do more.
It should be.
I double down on that.
Yes. I know we talked about this beforehand and talking about who our audiences are and how parallel they are, and all the ladies out here listening to this show and are also a part of your audience. And something that I really stand for with my brand and the space that I take up as a nutrition coach in particular is really helping women see that we can agree. You are already trying to do all of the things. You are already trying to accomplish everything. Your task list, your priorities are very long and vast between the other people that you're taking care of in your life, the relationships that you're in, both personal and professional. So we don't need to debate that you're already doing a lot, right? But what we do need to debate is the order of those priorities and the fact that you tend to be at the bottom. And what I really work to help women change the narrative on is, how can we get you to be at the top of the list? And you just said it perfectly because you actually said it twice, filling your batteries, right? And why are your batteries full when you go for a walk, not only on your own and solo, but also without your cell phone? It allows you to focus on the present moment. what's happening right in front of you and really helping you start your day from a place of like, hey, I already took the time to take care of me. And let me ask you this question, Dr. Elia. Did that negatively impact you from getting anything else done? Like you still get everything done in your day that you need to, right?
And I want to point something out. When people face a challenge or a crisis, you know what the first thing that goes out the window is self-care.
Yeah, it
And,
happened to me,
and the
even with
opposite
everything
needs
I
to
know.
happen. I know,
Sure,
but we need to double down on the self-care
you
because
do.
the challenge happens and we need our focus like, oh, I got to take care of this. And we neglect ourselves. As a matter of fact, if we took care of ourselves, we would handle that crisis or that challenge a lot better.
So
And
true.
speaking about women specifically, the first half of my career, I was a clinical psychologist in private practice. 70% of my clients were women. Amazing, wonderful women, but not to themselves. So caretakers, nurturing, taking care of everybody else, but they would come in empty, suffering from depression, anxiety, stress. And the first thing is like everything that you said, I know how much you do for other people.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing for yourself? And the answer is, well, I don't have the time for that. I'm like, you know what? You don't, it's the opposite. You can't afford not to do that. And initially it was hard to convince that your nurturing side is never going to go away if you take care of yourself. It's not like, oh, if I focus on myself, I'm going to become this self-centered,
Right.
It's not like that. You're nurturing, you're loving, you're kind to other people, but it's out of balance. The reason why you're depressed and you're struggling and you're stressed out is because it's out of balance. So you got to focus a little bit on yourself and notice what happens to your other relationships too.
Yeah, it's so true. As somebody who, like I said, I have this knowledge and I stand for this. One of the reasons why I feel so strongly about this topic and reframing self-care as actually selfless, not selfish, is because I went through that period myself where I became very depressed and felt very empty and extremely burnt out. And it was coming off of a time where I was really putting my energy and focus on everybody else but myself. And I didn't stop and think about what I wanted. And then I took it a step further by it was during the pandemic. And when you said that you tripled down on your walks and
I
you kept
did.
walking more, I did the opposite. And I really got myself into a place of feeling defeated and disappointed for making the decision to not prioritize exercise more, to not prioritize the way I was taking care of myself with the food I was putting in my body, stress management, everything included with that. And I really like let that define my identity and felt like a failure. But you said it at the very beginning of this. We don't have to look at life from that perspective. It's a lesson. And the lesson in that for me was, wow, if I knew all of these things and I had all this knowledge and all this information at my fingertips, and I still allowed for this to happen to me, think about the person who doesn't have the knowledge and information that
Right.
I have. And that's what led me to decide like it's even more important for me to create the FYX podcast and to do the work that I do as a coach. And for as difficult as those experiences felt, that adversity that I went through, I made some really hard decisions at that time in my life. I left a job that was not good for me. I walked away from an engagement and canceled my wedding 6 months before. And I had
Wow.
no idea what was going to happen in the next few months. But literally the week after this, the pandemic like officially hit and the world was in like a lockdown mode. So there were a lot of question marks, not even in my personal life, but just like the state of the world we were living in. And while it was really tough, I will still to this day say that it was one of the best things I've ever done because it gave me so much clarity and now purpose for what I do and what I stand for and why it's like so deeply important to me to be able to do. And is the reason why you and I are sitting here right now having this conversation today, which is pretty incredible if you think about that.
And you're so delightful. I got to tell you that. I mean, I
Thank
don't know how
you.
old you are, but you're close enough to be my daughter's age, I think. And you're just delightful. Your energy and your countenance is beautiful. Just
Thank you
like
so
flat out.
much. I
Um,
appreciate that.
you're welcome. I think a lot of people came out of the pandemic because they had time to think because everything locked down, and
Mm-hmm.
myself included, actually, and say, what kind of life do I want to live the rest of my life? So mindfully, consciously, and to manifest, this wonderful, great life. People say, well, you're lucky. I'm like, well, maybe I am, but I've actually thought about these things that the way I live my life in a very detailed manner.
Mm.
And did it happen overnight? No, it didn't happen. Of course, COVID delayed a lot of these things, but it did happen and it is happening. And I think the key is consistency. It's not like I want to have one great month and like 6 lousy months. Like, no, every single day, I have bad days too, but they're not that many. And when they do happen, I just look to say, okay, I don't stay down for too long, I guess. And I've had that since I was a kid. Like a couple of days, then boom, I bounce back. I don't know even how that happens. It's been just part of my DNA, I think. No matter what happens in life, I bounce back fairly quickly.
Now, can I ask you, you mentioned that you've really, like, at least during the pandemic in particular, like you said, a lot of people did this. You took the time to like take stock and actually think about what you wanted your life to look like. What were some of the changes that you made in that moment over the course of the last couple of years? Or how did you just prioritize things differently so that we can, of course, give people the tangibles on what to think about for themselves?
Well, when people face challenges, they typically fall in four different categories. So, and the first one is the victim. Poor me. Why is this happening to me? That's just, it's pretty universal too. The
Mm-hmm.
second one is the critic. So the critic just blames and spews venom, anger, frustration, just like at everybody else. Mind you, they never take personal responsibility for their lives. That's just, but they're just mad all the time, frustrated, mad, angry. The third one is, and I saw that especially during the pandemic, is kind of like the bystander, like someone who's so overwhelmed by changes that are taking place in life that they're frozen in fear. It's like the deer with the headlights. Look, they just don't know what to do.
Mm.
And what all three of these have in common is none of them offer a solution. It's either poor me, I get mad all the time, or I'm frozen in fear. And then comes the fourth personality type, which is the navigator. So the pandemic hits, and in 1 week, I kid you not, all my speaking engagements all over the world got canceled. One email
I
after
believe it.
email. I'm sorry to inform you. So my whole work world just blew up. And initially, and here's the thing, it's not like, oh, Dr. Ely is the navigator and you're the no. All human beings have all four of them inside themselves. So
Right.
initially,
It's
I
a
had the deer.
spectrum.
Of course, I had the deer with the headlights look like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And poor me, I was supposed to speak in Barcelona that year. It got canceled. I've never been to Barcelona. I was feeling, and then I was mad at the government. I was like upset. But here's the thing: if you're going to be mad, do it for 30 minutes, not for 30 years. If you're
Mm.
going to feel like a victim, do it for an hour or two. Don't do it for 20 years or 20 weeks or even 20 hours. Like feel the feels, feel the feelings, and shift and become a navigator. So when that happened, I'm like, okay, I'm stuck. So what can I do? You know what I did?
Sure.
I ended up writing the first book to market in the world, co-wrote it, Seven Keys to Navigating a Crisis, How to Emotionally Deal with Pandemics and Other Disasters. It was
I
the
had a feeling that was when you wrote that book, and I
That's
was
when I
going to
wrote
ask you
because I had
that.
time. There
Right.
were no plans in 2020 for me to write a book. I was busy. But that's what navigators do. That door closes. Well, what can I do then? What is within my control? My attitude, that's within my control. And what do I decide to do? Or I could have sat here and said, poor me, nobody's calling me. I have no work. I could have done that. And I did it for like a day or two until I realized, like, well, this isn't going to help me. What can I do? And then all of a sudden I had the download. I call them downloads. You got to get this book out because I felt the prompting was so strong that the pandemic is not the real issue. Is the impact of the pandemic that's going to have on people's mental health.
Right.
And I saw in my mind's eye there's this tsunami that's going to sweep the world of depression, sadness, loneliness. Like people are really struggling with mental health. And that's why I wrote the book because I just felt like that was going to happen. And of course, it did happen. And it's still happening to some degree. I mean, people are still not 100% back, I don't think.
I agree with you. I think it was a long enough period of time that it's interesting. Like we were saying this before we hit record, you're like, okay, this feels like it's like 5 years ago. And yet it also feels like it was just yesterday. And I think for that reason and that like concept of time and even just the way it distorted concept of time, like that's how I really felt about it. And honestly, that was actually one of the reasons why I started to recognize that I was dealing with depression because of like my inability to like really conceptualize time in a way that I had previously been like the person who was always on the go.
Right.
And I think that it's something that we have a responsibility to ourselves to take the time to reflect and think about like okay, if you're still dealing with some of these effects of this, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's more about like, well, what are we doing about it? Are we sitting here on our hands and saying like, oh, well, like this was, like you said, that victim mentality of like, were these just the cards you were dealt? Or can we look at this as an opportunity to take better care of ourselves, or to really rethink, like you mentioned, how you wanted your life to look and how you wanted that to be designed?
Yeah, and navigators do certain things on a consistent basis. Number one is massive self-care, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Obviously, having an attitude of gratitude, and especially when there's adversity in life, to find
Mm-hmm.
the golden nugget. They're also very flexible and adaptable.
Mm.
And the analogy I like to use is the oak tree and the palm tree, right? So the oak tree is this magnificent, beautiful tree, 100 feet high, massive, right? Stable and beautiful. However, if there's enough rain and enough wind and the ground gets saturated, guess what happens to oak trees? We see that in every hurricane season. Oak trees come crashing down on people, cars, homes. It happens all the time. The palm tree, on the other hand, which is this beautiful kind of exotic tropical tree, at the peak of the storm, and I'm talking about the storms of life, palm trees can literally, at the peak of the storm, lay flat, like they go like this. But when the storm passes and the sun comes out, like it always does in life, guess what happens to the palm tree? It rises up again.
Yeah.
And not only does it survive, but it's stronger than it was before because its roots had to dig down deep underground to hold on for dear life. So the call to action, of course, is be a palm tree, don't be an oak tree when there's a storm.
Beautiful.
So people say, and I've shared this around the world. People said, well, that's a
Yeah.
cute story. We'll remember that. But what does an oak tree sound like in human form? Yeah, that's a great. Be an oak tree. So an oak tree, when a challenge happens and there's a crisis, their approach is, well, this is who I am. I've been this way for 40 years. I'm not going to change now. And they get stuck. The palm tree, of course, is like, okay, you know what? All my talks got canceled. But here's the funny thing. I'm not a technical person. I know nothing about, but I started opening myself up to Zoom, which was new
Sure.
for me back then. And the funny thing, Chris, is that I spoke in front of 50,000 people over Zoom, more than I would have done face to face. And the brand reached, like I spoke to in India for four different times during that year, like truly global. If I wasn't flexible and said, you know what, I'm Dr. Elia, I'm a keynote speaker. I don't do Zoom.
I only do this in person, right?
Exactly. I only do keynotes in person, right? Guess what? I would have missed a huge opportunity
Sure.
to connect with people. That's what flexibility and adaptability does. And navigators are really good at that. So the question to your audience is, how flexible and adaptable are you when you're facing a challenge? Do you dig in your heel and say, well, this is who I am. I'm not going to change now. Or are you like, well, that door's closed. What can I do now? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, so well said. And I appreciate you saying, like, you're like, this analogy sounds like a cute one, because it is, and it's easy to remember, but it's important to really unpack that and to think about it in that way and say, like you said earlier about everybody having all versions of these people, and it's really on a spectrum. It's important to go back to these things because we will be tested. And we said that, we know that we will be tested. So I do want to shift gears a little bit in talking more about your path and how you got here, and really just asking the question of like, what prompts somebody to wind up being the happiness doctor? And I know you have a big personal story inside of this too. So
I have a couple of stories. The first one was, I think there's some pivotal moments in life where you hear something that changes the course of your life. And there's two of them that happened. The first one, I was a 5-year-old little boy in Greece. And my grandpa Elia, whose name I carry and I honor, and he died when I was 6. So it's not like I have a lot of memories of my grandpa.
Oh, wow. But you remember this.
But I remember this. And I was sitting on his lap, and he was this wonderfully loving, just adorable. I adore my grandpa. He said to me, I remember like a 5-year-old little brain. Think about like how young somebody is at 5 years old.
It's a core memory.
I know. Can I tell you a secret? I'm like, yes, Grandpa. I'm looking up at him. He goes, then he goes, do you want to be the richest man in the world? And all of a sudden, my ears go like Bugs Bunny. I'm like, yes, Grandpa. He said, if you want to be the richest man in the world, do something good for somebody else every day, and you, my boy, will be the richest man in the world. End quote. Now, at the time, I thought like Pirates of the Caribbean, right? Gold and silver and like my little brain thought about. That's why I thought about the richest man in the world. But obviously, as I've gotten older, and I've practiced that, my little brain caught do something good for somebody else every day, and you'll be the richest man in the world. And I've lived my life that way for over 50 years. Do something good for somebody else. Kindness costs nothing. Kindness is free. And I'm not talking about random acts of kindness. I'm talking about deliberate, conscious, mindful acts of kindness. Because what is kindness? Kindness is love in action. And it comes easy. I mean, that's another thing that navigators do really well, and happy people do really well. Again, because their batteries are full, they're able to do acts of kindness all the time.
Sure. It's like it's you don't have to think about it. It
No,
just
you don't
happens.
have to think about it. So
Mhm.
that was like that kind of, I think, set the tone and kind of defined me, who I've been for the last, half a century or so. I give a lot
Mhm.
of credit to my grandpa because it just resonated with me. It clicked for
Yeah.
whatever reason. The second thing, of course, that happened is when my mom passed away, just before she died from cancer. I was 22, and my mom was like, my mother was beloved by men and women. She wasn't just loved, which is different. She was just all love, unconditional love. I mean, everybody, she was just like, and I felt it growing up. What's tragic and sad, of course, is that, I didn't, and it's kind of funny because I just, not celebrated, but it was 40 years ago in October that my mom died.
Wow.
40 years, 4 decades. And it's like, and she's still the most impactful person in my life because just before she died, and these are her last comments to me. She said, my boy, she says, don't worry about me. I'm going to be just fine. I just want you to be happy, end quote. And then she went into a coma. She died within 48 hours. Well, for the first year after she died, I'm like in massive depression, grief, because I completely lost. I mean, my dad started to drink even more because my mom and dad were in love with one another, and she
Oh,
was the love of his life. So he goes off the deep end. My older brother leaves and does his own thing because, who knows why, and his own grief. So I went from having this incredible family. It's like somebody threw a freaking grenade and blew my whole family up. And I was lost. I was completely lost. I didn't want to get up in the morning. I wasn't suicidal, but I was like, God, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I'm okay with it because I get to be with my
mhm.
mom.
Yeah.
And for a full year, I was like that, and I just struggled. But something weird happened on the 1 year anniversary of her death. Her words came back to me,
Wow.
like, I just want you to be happy. And I'm like, you know what? The best way to honor mama is for you to be happy. And something clicked inside of me. It's not like I don't miss her. It's not like I don't, I mean, it's a huge hole that until I see her again, when I cross over to the other side,
Of course.
that hole is never going to be. I mean, it's huge because she was such a great human being. Um, but those two things, do something for somebody else and be happy, kind of like, I don't know, I think help define who I am and who I've been.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I know you said that I heard you mention this on another podcast, that you graduated college early, a
I
little bit
did.
early.
I did. I was 21. So
Yeah,
really, I'm still wearing that's
I
my
like it.
I
At that time, your mom hadn't said to you what she said to you that stuck with you. So, like, what else kind of clicked for you to realize, like, hey, this is the path I want to take professionally, like to not only just be happy for yourself, but you're taking it to the next level here of actually living out her impact, right? Of being like, I want to help other people feel this way too.
So it's kind of funny because I didn't go back to get my master's and PhD for like a few years after my undergrad.
Okay.
I was afraid that if I listen to people's problems, I might get depressed and not be happy. I
That
was
you would
scared.
absorb them.
I would
Sure.
absorb that.
Yeah.
Turns out that's not the case. So I went into real estate actually. But back in those days, real estate was not a good time to go. It was like interest rates were like
Yeah.
20%. It was off. It
Oh
was great.
gosh.
So at some point, I realized that this isn't for me, although I love real estate. And I went back to graduate school, and the rest is history. I mean, I had my own private practice, and then I became a coach and author and speaker and all that stuff. And I never ask my audience or anybody that I speak to do something I'm not willing to do myself. I would never ask you, Krista, or anybody else saying, you should do that, but I don't really do that kind of stuff, but you should do it. If I say something, I do it. Otherwise, I won't say it. And both of the books, including the happiness book that became a #1 bestseller, I wrote them from my heart, not as a PhD. Like I'm talking to you right now, that's how I wrote them. And it's resonated with people because they're not theory, they're practical stuff. And my patients taught
Right.
me that. Like they taught me all those things. I learned a lot from them. Forgiveness, self-forgiveness. That's another huge thing. Happy people forgive themselves. Unhappy people carry this invisible backpack full of rocks that they put on every morning before they even brush their teeth, and they go about life wearing this 1,000 pounds on their back. Resentments, lack of forgiveness, mistakes, and all that kind of stuff. So self-forgiveness to me is missing in action with a lot of people. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's not mentioned enough. When people talk about happiness, they talk about gratitude and kind and all that.
Sure.
But believe me, forgiveness, and especially self-forgiveness, is a big part of it.
Do you think self-forgiveness and just that concept of forgiveness is one of the hardest pieces to kind of overcome? Because I feel like when I think back on my own life, or at the times that I felt the most stuck, it was because I was hanging on to that in particular.
I do. And just my dissertation was on Alcoholics Anonymous. So I did a lot of my patients were addicts,
Okay.
alcohol, drugs, and so on. And of course, when they come to you, they're at rock bottom, right? I mean, their life is completely out of control, and they've destroyed relationships and so on. Anyway, come to therapy, we turn things around. They're sober for a year. We celebrate their 1 year birthday and so on. And I have an interview with them. One of the last questions: do you think your spouse has forgiven you? Yes. Your kids, your boss, blah blah blah. God, yes, yes, yes. Final question: have you forgiven yourself? Guess what? The best answer I received, not the most common one, but the best. I'm working on it. That was the best answer. The most common answer was no. And I'm like, okay, well, we're not done yet. Sit back on the couch, because you got to get through that. Because if you don't forgive yourself, it's going to hurt you long term. It's hurting you right now. And I have a process I take people to. It's not that hard. I mean, and we would have like one session, 2-3 hours, and we'd clear the slate, like everything. And
how did that feel for those people? Like, what was it like for them to go from that state of not forgiving to 2 hours later? Like,
honestly, Krista, the process is this. I would ask them to write down everything that they haven't forgiven themselves for. Everything. Okay. Sometimes there are things they did like 50 years ago, which is absurd. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Write a list. It could be 5 things, could be 15 things, could be 50 things. I don't really care. Once you do that, put a number next to each one of those statements, 1 through 10. 1 is, yesterday I was having dinner with some friends and I spilled this red wine on my white shirt and I was embarrassed. That's a 1, which is like a nothing. A 10 is I actually murdered somebody, because people are like actually killed another human being. That's a 10, right?
Right.
And then I'm like, okay, let's start. And we would usually start with the 1s, the 2s, and the 3s, the easy stuff to forgive. Gain some momentum, gain some practice, gain some confidence, and then we move up to the harder things to forgive. Okay. And sometimes the session would be like 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever, however long it took. And then we're done. That piece of paper that they wrote on, we burn it, like actually physically burn it symbolically, so it goes up to the heavens. And then when they would leave and we have like our last hug, you know what people would say? 2 things. Number 1, I wish I had done that years ago. Everybody has said that. There's one person that said, oh, I mean, this was. And the second thing is, I feel like 100 or 1,000 pounds have been lifted off of me. I can't believe how free I feel. Like, I'm like, there you go. That's it. Beautiful.
So beautiful. I have chills as you're describing this, because I understand like the impact of what that could have on someone. I'm also curious. I'll say that I've heard like variations of that type of exercise, right? Where I've totally heard the one where it's like writing certain things down and then burning it, different topics.
We go through each statement though. Each statement we go.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting to me. I'm curious what for you personally, and you mentioned this, like there's nothing that you wouldn't do yourself that you've asked your patients, anybody that you get to connect with and speak to, that you wouldn't do that too. So how did you develop that process? Like what led you to come up with that exact kind of step-by-step approach to it?
It was just inspiration.
Okay.
I mean, I can't take it. It's not like I read it somewhere but here's the interesting thing. Alpha males don't do it that way, which I discovered because I do a lot with C-suite. I work with senior leaders and so on, and I take this process. Alpha males, when I told them and expressed it, they're like, okay, let's start with the 1s, the 2s, and the 3s. They're like, no.
We got to go to the 10.
Exactly. How did you know that? Yes, they want to. So the first time somebody told me, I'm like, why?
I got a few alpha males in my life, so that's how I know.
Yeah, and they're thinking behind that, if I can do my 10s, 9s, and 8s first, then everything else is easy. Well, frankly, I don't give a shit which way you go. As long as you do the exercise, I don't really care. I just think it's easier to start with the smaller stuff and move, but that's just me. So, but the first time he was a CEO that told me that, I'm like, okay, let's try it your way. I'm like rolling my eyes. It actually worked for him.
Huh.
It was hard work because that was like a 9 or a 10. That was a really big thing. But once we got through that, he realized like, man, I don't really need to hold on to these 7, 6s, 5, 4s, and 3s. Like, why? Because I was able to forgive myself for the bigger
For
stuff.
the big stuff, right?
I still stick to my process. I think it's easier to start with the lower stuff,
Yeah,
some momentum. But if
sure.
people want to do it that way, who am I to argue with that? If that works for them, that's fine.
Yeah.
Isn't
So
that
I have
interesting
another,
though?
it
It's
is
interesting.
very interesting. And I have another question, like down this male female path for you. You said that initially in your clinical practice and in that environment, you were working with a lot of women. And
Yes.
now fast forward to the last few years of being more of the keynote speaker, working with C-suite executives, just naturally there tend to be more men in those positions. What has that been like for you? What are some things that you've learned and observed, like maybe some of those nuances that you're describing, like that one?
Yeah, that's a great, nobody's ever asked me that question before. I just think I like working with women more. Just to be honest, and not with my TV show, The Happy Hour with Dr. Elia, like 90% of my audience is women, which I love that.
Mhm.
I think I think women are braver. And I've worked with, I mean, tens of thousands of people, and I've helped hundreds of that over the last 35 years. I think women have more courage, meaning that when they need help, they actually ask for help.
Mhm.
Men, man, they fight it because it's not manly to ask for help, especially alpha males.
Right.
And so working with the C-suite, I've tried at least to make it that, man, it's okay to ask for help. It doesn't mean you're weak. As a matter of fact, your wife will appreciate you if you do that. But men, we've been conditioned to be a certain way, and I think my feminine side actually is stronger than my masculine side.
I
And I
could
think
see
that's from
that.
my mom. I mean, it's my mom.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
that's
was
that.
about to ask you that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's my mom. Although I'm 1/4 Spartan, so I don't know if you ever saw the movie 300. This is
Of
Sparta.
course. Yeah.
So my grandpa Elia Gourgouris' wife was 100% Spartan. So
Wow.
no, I know. So I feel like I'm 3/4 like soft, gentle, funny, just joyful, so on. But if somebody messes with my family, people that I love, that 25% Spartan comes out,
It
and
comes right out.
it's a full-blown masculine, like the divine masculine energy comes out, and
Yep.
you better hide. Like, I mean, don't mess with me when it comes to that. But for the most part, I'm not that way. For the most part, I'm like, you see me right now, but don't mess with my family or loved ones. That's There's another
To,
side. The Spartan
yeah.
side comes out.
To that end of the feminine side, too, though, I know you have a daughter. I know you mentioned grandchildren. I don't know if it's boys and girls or all girls, but how did that also influence, you being a dad to a daughter versus maybe a son?
So raising boys is different, and our daughter
Yeah,
is not a biological daughter. It's like she's adopted us as parents. We've adopted her, so it's not like she grew up like, but we're like a second set of parents in some ways.
that's so
But
nice.
but if I could design like the perfect daughter, she would be it. She's such a badass. She's an incredible woman,
Oh,
and yeah, and she does personify the divine feminine. I mean, she's a goddess. She's like an Amazon. Powerful, beautiful, great mom. Yeah, there are three women: my wife, my mom, and my daughter. I think that have had the most impact in my life. I think women have had more impact in my life than, frankly, than men. So I'm very comfortable in my feminine side. I mean, I feel like that's probably the best part of me, which actually made me a really good psychologist and coach and so on, because I was that way. Kind of especially for a Greek man who was raised like, be tough. I had a tough dad.
sure.
He was
Yeah,
like,
I'm sure.
you know, my dad was tough on me, certainly on the outside. But he was old school, fought in the Korean War. I mean, he was just like, yeah, he was. But he showed me how to love women. Like the way he loved my mom was a great example. For all his toughness,
Hmm.
he was it was a beautiful relationship that they had, a beautiful marriage. But it crushed him. He never recovered from my mom's death. I mean, he tried. Poor guy. He tried. He just couldn't do it. He couldn't.
Yeah, he lost that person in his life that for I'm sure all of the things that you're recalling about your mom and sharing about the impact that she had on you and you said that they truly were best friends. That's a
I mean, they
very
started dating
powerful
when they were
man.
16, They were
That's
together. And,
great.
and my mom
You
died
don't
when she
hear
was
that
50.
today.
I know. I mean, she was 51 when she died. So they were together for 35 years, like,
Wow.
first love, honestly. And he lived another 15 years after my mom died, but he was miserable. He just wanted to be with her. He never overcame it. And you know
Yeah.
what? It was sad. I mean, that's part of our family's story.
Hmm.
Um, and I empathize with my dad a lot more after he passed away. But like when I got to be 51 and I got to be his age, I'm like, oh my gosh, what if
You get it
if I
now.
what if I was a widower right now? Like what if I lost my
Sure.
wife right now? I didn't fully understand him, when he was still alive because he was kind of
As your dad.
I didn't understand him until afterwards. I know.
Hmm. Yeah. But
So
that's an interesting take. I think that even of itself, the pieces that you've picked out of even mentioning like, yes, your dad had this tough exterior and he parented you that way, but he also taught you how to show up as a partner and be there too. It's
yes.
like that contrast is so important, but I also think it just says a lot about everything you've shared so far of having that right perspective of being happy because you've chosen to remember those pieces and then now can sit in this stage of your life and be like, okay, I can reflect on this and a lot of these things do make sense despite whatever the dynamic may have been between the two of you, between your like 20s, 30s, etc.
Yeah, it was, we had I mean, I love my dad. And, when I was 15 years old, I don't remember what the story was, but I was crying and I was like holding onto my mom's arm at 15,
Mhm.
and they were going out on a date. So he was like annoyed that I was crying and all that stuff. And he turned to me, he just wanted to go with his wife. I get it now, but
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
was a kid, and he goes, "You're too sensitive." And man, it cut me to the core. It was so painful to hear that because I was a sensitive boy. And basically his message was like, toughen up. So of
Sure.
course, after that, like, I don't want to be crying. I'm embarrassed that I'm crying. My dad's calling me out on it. And I carried that pain for decades until recently when I had like this kind of spiritual journey. And I realized that he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to himself. He was too sensitive, but because of the
Mm.
generation that he grew up in, he didn't have the skill
Yeah.
set to
He
even
couldn't
appreciate
portray
that
that.
sensitivity is a great thing.
Yeah.
And I was able to forgive him because he really hurt me when he said that. It like really hurt me. And I was able to understand like he's actually talking about to his inner child.
Hmm.
This has nothing to do with me when he said that. But as a 15-year-old, I was crying when he said that to me. He was like, you might as well hit me with a 2x4.
Sure.
It was really painful to hear. And I had held on to that for a long time. So I was able to like just in the last couple of years, just release that and understand my dad even better. Because I'm able to say I'm sensitive and I'm okay as a man to be sensitive. I can still be a man and be sensitive. He didn't
Hmm.
have that option. Not in his generation,
No.
you know? So
So so as you think about like your message and the work that you're continuing to do you see yourself like shifting more potentially into the education around like the parenting aspect and like what it's like to raise? I know this could be a totally different podcast, but I'm
yeah.
curious like what your take is on raising boys today to help them have that
And
balance.
it's okay that my boys are sensitive.
Sure.
Like, and I actually say that because they're also like want to be tough. I'm like, no, your sensitivity actually is one of your highest traits. I mean, our oldest son is married, and I'm like, your wife is going to appreciate you. Just trust me that show your sensitivity. It's okay that you're sensitive. You're still a man,
Hmm.
and you can do all the things that the man things do, but your sensitivity is not to be like I embrace it. And I wish I had somebody that had said that to me when I was young, but I didn't. That's not how life was. I got the opposite. I got criticized for it. Um, but you know what? It's okay. My dad was doing the best that he could. He did the best that he knew how, right?
Yeah,
So for me,
absolutely.
I love my kids, I love my boys, and it's a lot easier being a grandfather than being a father.
My
To get that,
parents are newly grandparents
yeah, I
too.
know, right?
And I'm a new aunt. I have a niece and they have a granddaughter, but I
There you
know
go.
that they would make that statement for sure.
I know. It's so
Yeah.
different. It's so
Yeah.
different. You get the best of everything being a grandpa.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right.
But you're right. I think what you said about your dad, like the piece of it, like being a projection for him. I mean, even think about that visually. Like I'm very into looking at the inner child. Like I've done a lot of that work myself with a coach and it's been very healing. That angle has actually really allowed me to help me forgive myself, and doing the exercises of like actually talking to younger versions of me has been huge in my own personal growth. And when you think about that, like there you were like 15 years old and you're crying, like your dad's like looking at that. And that is like in real time, that sort of
Right.
projection too.
I love that you're using that word projection, because I think when people criticize us or say anything, the first thing I want you to ask yourself, is this really true, or is that somebody else's projection? Because I'm here
Mhm.
to tell you the majority of the times it's other people's BS. It's out there, it's their projection. It has nothing to do with me. Now, if I ask that question and it does have something to do with me, then I got to own it and I got to take
Sure.
some responsibility for it and deal with it. But I'm telling you, when people criticize you, for the most part, those are their projections. So when I hear that, I'm like, and I'm very good right now to know what's mine and what isn't mine. I'm like, that's not mine. That's yours. Take it back. I don't accept it. It's your projection. It has nothing to do with me. You're in a bad place and you're dumping this on me. Toxic, you know. And I made a decision 20 years ago. I don't want any toxic relationships in my life, period. And I don't have any. And people are like, yeah, that sounds like an exaggeration. You truly have nobody who's toxic in your life. I'm like, I don't. I'm like, well, what if it's a member of your family? And my answer is, of course it's a member of your family. At least one or two people. At least. So, but here's how you deal with toxic people. The first thing you got to do is, how do you show up in that relationship first, before you talk about, let's not talk about them. So let's talk you and I, Crystal. Do I treat you with love, kindness, and respect? I'm
Yes.
asking you. Okay.
Yes.
So if that's the case, then I expect you in return to also treat me with love, kindness, and respect. Isn't that
Mhm.
fair after all? In other
Sure.
words, I can't be a jerk to you and then expect you to be loving, kind, and respectful to me. That's why it always starts with how we show up in relationship. So as long as I do my part and I treat you with love, kindness, and respect, I have every right to expect you to do the same. And if you don't, either we're not going to have any relationship, or if it's a family member, we'll have a very superficial relationship. But because I love you and I care about you, I hope we have a deep and profound relationship. But you got to show up differently if you want to have a relationship with me. And that's the conversation. This is what I call hot conversations, HOT, which stands for honest, open, and transparent. Is it easy to
Love
do that?
that.
It's not. Is it necessary? Absolutely. And I've done that with people. Guess what happens? Most people have actually stepped up and actually stopped being toxic, because I mean it. And if you continue to be toxic with me, you're going to get a 6-month timeout. You're out. We'll talk in 6 months. What? I'm like, I'm serious. I'm not putting up with your toxicity, because I continue to show up big time for you when you need me, with love, with kindness, and respect. So I expect the same in return. And that's a non-negotiable, kind of like my self-care. Those are two non-negotiables: toxicity and self-care, period. Done.
The
Most
other
people step
important
up.
the other important part about all of that, and I apologize, my dog is
No, I
having
love
some
that. I
fun
love
in
that
the
you haven't talked this
background.
much. That's good. Yeah.
But yeah, the other part about what you just mentioned is like that's how we also execute on boundaries. And I see that very wrapped up in some of the challenges that a lot of my clients face with feeling like they don't have time for the gym, to meal prep, and the idea of like not prioritizing your self-care. A lot of it comes back to feeling uncomfortable executing on a boundary and also communicating on it too. And what you just said is doing exactly that, but it's also wrapped up in a ton of logic where it's like we can feel comfortable with the boundary because everything you said makes sense. It's like, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm seeing. It's not, you're not even making it about the other person that much in a way, because it's more about you and your standards and your values and what you want to uphold. And then you're just asking for that to be reciprocated.
There's two beautiful things that you've said so far. The one was the projection that we talked about, and the other one is the word boundary. I want your audience to think about that. Every time we get mad at someone, is because they have violated a boundary. But who are we really mad at? Is it really them, or is it point right here because I allowed that to happen? Nobody put a gun to my head to have somebody be toxic towards me, right? I'm assuming nobody put an actual gun to your head. You know what I mean? So I'm responsible also. And that's why I talk about navigators taking personal responsibility for their lives. If that happens, that's on me, and it's on me to fix it. And that's when you have those hot conversations, although they're not easy. The first couple times, they weren't easy for me either when I
I'm
had
sure
them.
they weren't.
They weren't easy. And I'm an expert at communication.
Right.
But my part was like, because it's not easy to have those conversations. Now it's a piece of cake for me because I've had practice.
Mm-hmm.
And they know that I mean it. I'm like, and if you continue being toxic, you're going to get banished for a year. What? I'm like, or we'll have I'll call you Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, happy
And that'll
birthday,
be it.
in a
Yeah.
text even. I'm not even going to talk
Mhm.
to you until you show up with love, kindness, and respect towards me. And it's an amazing thing what has happened. I have no toxic people in my life because I've enforced it with love and kindness, but firmness and
Mhm.
boundaries, exactly like you said.
Mhm. And I love what you said, even about the fact that so many people might assume that that would cause those other people to be pushed away. But you said this twice. In most cases, everyone has actually stepped up. So it's like, this is better for everyone because now that person is also being the person that they also probably want to be.
Exactly. I mean, is there some risk? Yeah, if somebody continues to be toxic, I don't want to be around them anyway. So there's
Right.
no loss there. And and I say I love you and I care about you, so I want to have a deeper and more profound relationship, but not under
Mhm.
these circumstances. This will
Sure.
never happen again. I'm done with that. That's it. And that's more like kind of like the masculine energy coming out. That's like
Yeah.
the
I was
Spartan in
about
me.
to
Like
say
I'm
that.
done with that. That's
Mhm.
like that. Yeah. So and that's okay. They need to hear it.
Yeah. And I think, for as much as we were saying, like you're in touch with your feminine side of things too, it's, I think, even thinking about all of the female patients that you've worked with, you being able to be that way sets a good example for them to work on that side for themselves.
Yeah, and it's they have a harder time having those conversations initially. I think women, but
Mhm.
once you do it once or twice, and you see the results, because in life it doesn't really matter what we know, Krista. What matters is what we do with what we know.
Mm.
We all know like nutrition
Yes.
is important? Don't we all know exercise is
Yep.
important? We know. What do we do with what we know? That's all that matters in the end,
Right.
right? That's all that matters.
My favorite thing to hear people say, and I truly mean it's my favorite because I know it's a great coaching opportunity, is when it comes to fitness and nutrition, I get this line all the time with a potential client. I know what I need to do, but I'm just not doing it. So, what I challenge to them is great, you know it. So, the coaching for us to do together is not as, surface level as me giving you macronutrients to follow, telling you to meal prep, getting you into the gym X number of times a week. We got to dig here a little bit and figure out, if you know this and you know you need to do it, what's actually getting in your way of not doing it? Is it a belief that you have? Is it a way that you see yourself? It's usually up here.
It's
So
usually up
let's
there.
really work through that aspect of it.
And what is it usually? What do you find? Why are people stuck that way?
I find that it does go back to the narrative of putting other people first. And this, granted, like I have more of the slanted viewpoint of working specifically with women. I have a couple of male clients, and it's often like somebody's brother or husband or boyfriend or something like that. So I'm taking this stance from just the population that I
Sure.
work with and who I really speak to. But I think, for what I see with a lot of my clients who like really are open with me about it too, they come from this place of like, they're like, well, I like have to fill this certain role, that I need to be the best at something, or that they need to be able to provide for themselves, for their family, and be like the best fill in the blank of whatever role we're talking about here. And that's making them truly believe that like they need to be putting all these other people before themselves. Or sometimes it's coming from other places. Like I don't get this one as often, but I honestly think I don't get it because I think some people are not willing to admit it. I could have a client who, I've heard this a few times over the years, they actually feel like a level of protection by keeping themselves in a state of not prioritizing their health. So if, let's say, they've gained weight, they start looking at the other areas of their life, a big one being personal relationships, especially romantic ones, sometimes even professional. And they use their lack of that relationship being what they want it to be, whether it's because they're not with someone and they're lonely in their singleness, or maybe they don't have the job position that they want. And the weight piece actually becomes a crutch, but it's operating from fear, because what they're really saying is, if I lose the weight and then I don't have the fulfillment in these other areas of my life, then that wasn't good enough. Or there's another reason why I'm being rejected. So it becomes this like armor in a way that they can almost make an excuse for saying, like, oh, well, of course, like I don't have the relationship I want, because who would want to be with me if I don't look the way I would like to look?
No, that's a protection
Yes.
mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
which, and I know exactly what you're talking about because I've had so many women that I work
I'm
with
sure.
done that. But once they do, here's the funny thing: once they do the work and they heal on the inside,
Mm-hmm.
the weight drops off without doing anything else different.
So much ease.
It's
Yes.
incredible how that happens.
It's incredible because what happens is you start to find it so much easier to follow through on a lot of the commitments that you want to make to yourself too. It's like the person who comes to me and tells me like they just cannot possibly find the time to meal prep. So they wind up being the one that is, ordering DoorDash or like constantly like picking up food on the way home. As soon as they do the inner work, and I have a lot of clients who will simultaneously work with a therapist while working with me. And I find that they get results faster because it's like they have the second person in their ear who's helping them really reframe some of these things or taking the space to actually ask themselves questions about it. And I've even found from working with a self-development coach that it's then influenced the way that I coach. I ask them different questions, but I saw that in my own life this year. Like I was very much stuck for a while in the story of I wanted to grow my business and I couldn't figure out a way to like make the time to also make time for myself. And I derive a lot of value in like the success of the business. The irony is that it's important to me, not only for my health, but just like professionally to prioritize myself, to walk the walk, like we said at the very beginning of this conversation. But I got myself to a place of like, I have to be behind my computer and I can't take the 30 minutes to go work out. And it was a combination of that, not asking for help, that fast forward to the beginning of 2024, hiring this other coach. I've always had my own nutrition coach and I've always had somebody who's, been there for me in some kind of capacity as a trainer, but adding in this development kind of piece to it, I was able to lose 20 pounds this year in a way that just felt like felt more natural, despite everything I already knew. Because for a while I was stuck in that place of like, I know what I need to do. I'm telling my clients what I need to do. So I wasn't satisfied with the fact that I was feeling stuck. I'm like, I got to figure this out. And that's what really helped me realize it's like, okay, there's a domino effect here. If you start to see yourself a different way, and I've heard you talk about this, I love the wording you use. Like, I think you attach the word brand to it, right? Like your personal brand. It's you see yourself in a different way, then the decisions that you should be making, they just happen for you.
It just happen, right?
You're not like, I have to do this. You're like, oh, I actually want to do that. Like you said about going for the walk every single day.
Well, it started with I have to do it, and it became now that I want to do it, and it's not even an option. Yeah, that's like it's a non-negotiable. That's the third thing now you said that I agree. The first one was projections. Then second was boundaries. The third one is the story. So what stories are we telling ourselves about ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
And can we change the story?
Yeah. I think that's when
huge.
People talk about like hacks to fat loss, right? Or like, what's the hack? I recently did a masterclass for my audience on this. And I told them, I was like, I'm going to tell you the real secret. And it's a secret because no one else is talking about it. But once I tell you what it is, you're going to be like, oh, that makes sense. And the first one I said was the number one secret is the story that you're telling yourself.
Exactly.
But here's the thing. Story? If I went on Instagram and I said that, and I do, and like people do buy into it, but how much easier is it to sell someone this idea of like, oh, if you eat these calories and you follow this program and you do this for 30 days, I'm going to help you lose 10 pounds. That sounds way more attractive and tangible to somebody versus, hey, why don't we do this deeper work of rewiring the way you see yourself in the world? And that's what's going to help you not only lose the weight, but this is what I think is the most important part, keep it off and get you off this dieting like hamster wheel for the rest of your life.
Right. Yeah. I think the stories we tell ourselves about our lives or about our past, about our present, contribute mightily, depending on what the story is, or demise or to a great life,
Yeah.
And my story is that life is great. Life has adversity. We can overcome it. And life is about love and connectivity with people. And we only have one life. So live your best life now. And then my parting to your audience is do not procrastinate your happiness. That's my last thing.
That's a good one. How did you come up with that?
This came as a result of the pandemic, by the way.
Okay.
Because I think most people live in the when. When I have enough money, when I'm in the right relationship, when I have a family, when I have kids, when the kids grow up, when the kids get married, when I retire, right? Forget all the whens. If the pandemic taught us anything is that there's no guarantee for tomorrow. So as a result of that, live your best life now and don't procrastinate your happiness. That's it.
So well said. I think that has to be the perfect place to end it. So thank you. And before we completely let you go, for anybody who wants to continue to listen into your work, connect with you, I'd love for you to share. I'll put all of this down in the show notes, of course. Where can we keep in touch?
Yeah, join me on the happy hour with Dr. Elia. That's on the Mental Health Television Network, which is mhtn.org. Season one, I've got 6 episodes already out, and 26
Amazing.
episodes for season one, and hopefully we'll have season two and so on. Or go to dreliagourgouris.com or LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever. You'll find me. Yeah, I can
Perfect.
and all that stuff. Yeah. And I
Awesome.
would love to connect with, and I want people, I want to hear from your audience. Like, what do they think? I'm
Okay.
kind of curious. Like, what
Yes.
resonated with you in essence? If there was one or two things that out of our talk here today, which was such a pleasure, by the way,
Thank you.
between two swimmers, and it was great.
Yes, I love it. Thank you. And I want to underscore what you just said too of I say this at the end of every episode. And I think sometimes people get to the end and they're like, oh yeah, like, yes, like I liked the show, whatever. But I really mean it. And you said it perfectly. Like we do want to hear what you thought about this,
We do.
because when I think about topics I talk about on my own, or I think about the guests that come on this show, it's not just at random, right? And so I want to know and have that confirmation that there was something in here that affected you in some kind of way. And there's nothing that brings me more appreciation and just like gratitude for doing this and being able to podcast. I'm sure you feel this way about doing your TV show. For all the distractions that we have, something that keeps me going with podcasting, I'm actually coming up on next month. It'll be 4 years that I've been doing my
Wow,
show.
good for you.
Thank you. And I love it. Like, no matter how busy I am, even if I have to, like, shift some things or like throw together an episode at the last second, because sometimes weeks are like that. I love interviewing other people. And one of the reasons why I love it so much is because when else do we really get like an hour like this where we're not like kind of sort of also looking at our phones? Like, there's just something to be said for this is kind of a lost art.
I know.
And, I think other people appreciate that about podcasts too, because when listeners do message me about the show or I see them share it, when they message me and just say, like, I have a lot of listeners who are not clients of mine and they even work with other coaches. And I so appreciate when they send a message to be like, I loved this episode because of X, Y, and Z. And they're listening at a time when they get to unplug from things. Or maybe, like they're driving their car and they want to use that hour to do that. Or they're out for a walk and like they get to listen to the two of us.
I
So I
mean,
think that's really special.
you have such great energy,
Thank you.
it was such a pleasure. I mean, I've done over like 250 podcasts, and sometimes, they're good, sometimes they're great,
Sure.
sometimes like they're just going through but with you, just fully present and
Thank you so
engaged, and
much.
it was awesome. So it was
Well, I
great.
appreciate that because I've worked very diligently, I will say, to work on being more present. And that came a lot with some of the things I mentioned to you earlier. So thank you.
You're welcome. All right.
Thank you.
And thank you for
Well,
having me on your show.
of course, I appreciate it. To everybody who tuned in today, we thank all of you for being here. And once again, like Dr. Elia said, please tell us what you got as a takeaway from the show. Reach out to me, DM him. I'll relay it on to him if he doesn't
Yes,
hear from
please
you
do.
personally.
Yes, I would love
Yeah.
that.
So
Yeah.
that we know what kind of impact, what kind of people we're left with. So wherever you were listening from today, we appreciate you for being here and hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. And we'll catch you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.